last cool air of winter collides with the warm, moist air of spring, high above the central United States. Then, suddenly, terror. Smashing and twisting its way across the land with winds in excess of 200 miles per hour, a tornado strikes. In all of nature's fury, there is no windstorm as great or as deadly as the killer tornado. Each year they return, eclipsing the warmth of spring with the cold shadow of death. The tornadoes etch their mark, then vanish, unpredictable and unstoppable. Aided by advanced technologies, researchers and scientists probe the mysteries of the greatest of all storms, the tornado.
This series presents information based in part on theory and conjecture. The producer's purpose is to suggest some possible explanations, but not necessarily the only ones, to the mysteries we will examine.
Below the spring clouds of the Midwest, there's a richness of life. Cities and farms bask in the warming sun. People enjoy their traditions and diversions. But always present is a particular fear. At any moment, tranquility can change to chaos, contentment to misery. This is the tornado season. And these people live in Tornado Alley. Statistics say that a city within a tornado area will be hit only once in every 250 years. Yet, Oklahoma City has been struck 32 times since 1892, and Codell, Kansas, 3 years in a row on the exact same date. In 1974, 148 tornadoes killed 300 people and injured 6,000 more across 13 states, all in the same day. Damage totaled $600 million. Tornadoes attack the land with circular winds that topple structures and send bits of metal and wood through the air with lethal velocity. It is not unusual for steel to be pierced by a fragment of wood or victims to vanish forever. The force within a tornado is equal to all the energy in the United States running full power for 5 minutes. Survivors of a recent tornado in Holton, Kansas, comment on their experience with the twister.
Everybody respects them, I believe. I know I sure do. You just never can tell what they will do and where they will hit. I know these tornadoes here, they hit, and they bounce up, and then they come back down just like rubber balls. You just know where they're going to hit next.
think pretty much that they clear them, but yet they keep an eye on them. If the tornado's coming, a lot of them can see it 4 or 5 miles away, and they will keep an eye on it instead of going to the basement where they should go.
The worst disaster we had here was in the trailer, a mobile home, and there was 4 people in it when the tornado hit it, and apparently they were not warned.
The trailer, it set right up yonder, and as you can see, it was carried down here, and the frame sets over here, and it just looked like it picked it up and blew it up. They found a woman and a little girl approximately around a quarter of a mile from the scene. The father of the little girl, he died long in the night that same evening.
To millions of people, tornadoes are a frighteningly real part of everyday life. Each year, the United States suffers damage in the millions. The value of the lives lost is, of course, incalculable. The tornado is the fiercest of all storms. Unlike the hurricane, it can unleash its fury with virtually no warning, bursting forth from the storm in an instant to ravage the earth for seconds or as long as 3 hours. Hoping to increase the crucial warning time the public needs to avoid tragedy, a counteroffensive is being waged by a dedicated group of men and women who are probing this mysterious and lethal phenomenon.
Well, what I've prepared here is a sketch of an actual thunderstorm. It's a vertical cross-section, and the red arrows here indicate the major updraft within the storm, and the blue indicates the downdraft.
Men such as Dr. Ernest Agee and his associates at Purdue University hope to answer the most basic question of all. What makes a tornado behave the way it does? Utilizing a tornado simulator, they seek clues to the cause of the devastating winds that form the tornado funnel. Although there is no one answer, most scientists acknowledge that it is the interaction of warm and cold fronts that produce the thunderstorm. Just what starts the clouds violently rotating is still not fully known. It could be a function of the Earth's rotation or some internal phenomenon within the storm itself. Observing the effects of a simulated tornado on this model city provides graphic evidence of the power of the wind and its vacuum effect on buildings. The National Severe Storms Laboratory in Norman, Oklahoma, lies in the heart of the nation's most active tornado area. Here, meteorologists, technicians, and students work toward eliminating the element of surprise in the tornado's attack.
Okay,
Oh,
still
yeah,
up
that looks
there.
good.
Doug, can we have an ASRAN on the northwest circulation, please?
We still are maintaining very high standards.
Locked in a race against death and destruction, they utilize radar, satellites, computers, and eyewitness observations to scan the skies throughout the year in order to anticipate disaster. By analyzing and interpreting data, they attempt to provide the crucial lead time that spells the difference between early warning and tragedy. During the tornado season, the day begins with interpretation of the satellite photo by meteorologist John Weaver. He must decide on the day's tornado outlook and advise the staff. The prognosis of today's photograph is not good, and the storm track down begins.
Upper vertical wind structure is conducive to tornado generation, winds increasing and varying with height. The maximum wind in this sounding, although it's not showing here, is 70 knots aloft. I do expect, as I say, there's a very high probability of tornado formation in any storms which fire up along this warm front north of the low.
22,000 miles in space, a satellite confirms the telltale signs of a towering thunderstorm, parent to the tornado.
watch the circulation up here. It's updating now.
In a darkened room, a handful of men track and predict the storm, hoping to outguess its deadly intention.
Okay.
Look at
You
that.
might ought to call the weather service back and update them and call John.
And we got a forecast position on there.
Nerve center for the chase, they watch with mounting interest.
All right. Looks like we ought to do something on that.
Within minutes, the Storm Center issues an advisory.
This just in. The National Weather Service has just issued a storm watch for the following areas of Kansas: Jackson, Cook County, Larimer County.
Miles away, the skies only hint at what is to follow.
Attention, a violent storm has been sighted 15 miles to the southwest.
With the storm's approach, citizens are warned to take cover, possibly for their lives.
This area is under a tornado alert.
Okay, let's go. It's already going up.
Racing against time, an intercept chase team heads out to find the storm system and document the tornado's formation without becoming victims themselves.
Must be the harvest season again.
Led by meteorologist Bob Davies Jones, students Kelvin Drogemeyer and Ken Carson spend their summer vacation heading straight toward danger. But adventure is not what spurs them on. It is knowing that they are part of a coordinated effort to save lives.
We got two main missions. One is to get to within close range of tornadoes and get a close-range debris movie. We hope to be able to analyze the movie for trackable debris and get tornado wind speeds from such an analysis. Our other mission is to verify tornado signatures which are seen on the Doppler radar.
Okay, John, we'll take the LG exit and head west.
We're scrambling the jet to cover it.
Aerial observation and recording of the storm's activity is initiated using a specially equipped F-4 Phantom jet.
Okay, John, we're just turning onto I-35 just outside the lab. We're going to head south on Highway 76.
Flying near the speed of sound, the pursuit plane penetrates the storm system.
Time lapse started at 1200 CST.
Setting up near the storm's edge, the chase team focuses on the most promising area for tornado formation.
We'll be time lapsing at 1 frame per second.
Bob's camera records nuances of cloud activity hidden to the naked eye.
You want this 1 frame per second?
Yeah.
Might have a little trouble with the contrast.
We need to get back in touch with John at the lab, too, pretty soon.
Okay. Missile suit and control, do you copy, John?
Okay, John, I copy. What kind of sky cover do you have?
Okay, presently we got cirrus overcast. We time-lapse some rotation in the cloud base. Appear to be a funnel to our north, heading towards the northeast.
Okay, Roger.
Just been up on the observation deck, and there's a big new set of towers building into the southwest side of that El Reno.
Okay, thank you, Brad. OU1, do you copy?
Okay, control, this is OU1, go ahead.
John, we've got some towers that are growing pretty explosively to the northwest here. We're beginning to paint an echo on the scope, and I wondered if you could go up and take a look at those storms.
We're looking to the northwest. We have an extensive rain-free base. The towers are rapidly building. A little bit hazy, and we're having difficulty trying to see some of the features, but we are approaching and should give a better indication later on.
Okay, Roger, stand by, John. I'm going to see what Doppler has on that.
Okay, Don, we got some good cyclonic shear at mid-levels, 5 kilometers high. Coordinates are 297 at 58 kilometers. Okay, thanks, Larry. You see that, Mike?
Yeah, Don.
John, we've got some cyclonic shear, 297 degrees, 58 kilometers. And if you have a new satellite picture, we'd like to see that, too. All right, thank you.
Interpreting local cloud patterns, the chase team narrows in on the storm. For the experts, there's no doubt now. A tornado is forming. As information comes in, the worst seems imminent.
Okay, John, what do you see?
Okay, presently, John, the towers are growing very rapidly. It appears to be rotating quite dramatically. The appearance from here, John, looks like a rotating atomic bomb.
Yeah, that's only about 300 meters off the ground. So we're looking at it.
200 miles per hour. Don, this thing is really wrapping up. We better go with the tornado. Okay, Larry.
Call Tinker.
This is Don Burgess in SSL Norman. I'd like to issue you a tornado advisory for a storm that's 300 degrees at 20 nautical miles. I would put it right over the city.
Only moments separate the tornado from a town never struck before.
There it is again.
Oh, this is
right
great,
there.
Bob. We better log this.
Okay. So why don't you update it again, Larry?
Oh,
Okay.
wow.
There it is.
Oh,
There
it's
it is.
building.
Wow.
It's building.
How high off the ground is that, Larry?
Oh, this is right down the deck. I hope those people took cover.
Go ahead, OU1.
Roger, John. We have debris, a tornado on the ground just to our southwest. We are moving eastward very rapidly, and we'll attempt to get photographs and movies. Over.
Don 1715, Chase reports debris.
Chase sees the tornado, 330 degrees, 48 kilometers.
We have an update on the
looks like just about where we got it. They say County Line Road, Northwest Highway, there's been a lot of damaged houses destroyed.
For some, being lucky means the storm missed them. For farmer Dean Stouse, it means being alive and able to rebuild.
Yeah, we lost cows and calves and sows and some pigs. And I've still got some sows missing. Haven't come back. And, but there could have been a lot more killed than what actually was for all the debris and tin. There was a lot of tin flying around, and just like here, there was 41 fat cattle ready to be shipped Thursday, and this was Friday, the next afternoon, and we found every one of them, and no broken legs or anything like that. And I don't know how they got out of it. You can just see that stuff's just pounded right in the ground, and they got away.
Dean's wife, Karen, was alone in the cellar with her infant when the tornado struck.
I could hear things breaking, but I had no conception of the wind or anything because I was singing lullabies as I was feeding my son his food. And I didn't know the roof was off or the windows were out until I opened the door to the basement and could see the sky. And usually there's 2 flights of stairs going up to the attic, and they weren't there.
Until now, you know, you haven't been actually in contact. We helped back in when there was tornadoes south of here in Topeka and Meriden area, Silver Lake, when I was these boys' size. And, you know, I just never was personally involved, of course. But I am now.
I guess it frustrates me so much that people are primarily concerned with the house, and the house can be rebuilt with income, that if we don't get the farm going, we don't have any income.
But had it not been for advance warning, Karen Stouse and her baby might have been added to this year's list of fatalities. A list that is diminishing because of the dedication and skill of the men and women of the National Severe Storms Laboratory. It has been estimated that at any given moment, there are 1,800 thunderstorms in the atmosphere above us, each of which could produce a devastating tornado. Despite all the advances in the science of meteorology, the tornado remains perhaps the most challenging weather event of all. To date, we have no way to stop the tornado. We can only try to cope with it. Can we expect someday to be able to modify or control this unique force of nature? Dr. Edwin Kessler, director of the National Severe Storms Laboratory.
But we might turn heavy rains into moderate rains over a wide area. That would be very nice for agriculture. We would reduce erosion, and we would have a better supply of water power, for example, a more regular supply. But I'd like to emphasize that this is really very speculative at this time, and I would offer a comment that because of the really astonishing advances of the recent decades in areas of science and technology, particularly in America, we've tended to look towards science and technology for the answer to many problems for which science and technology are not well suited. The best thing that we can do about the tornado is to be intelligent about it. Heed the warnings, observe the clouds, so that you guide yourself intelligently in this marvelous atmosphere that God has provided for us.
Long ago, on the Midwestern plain, men and women gathered to watch the skies. In a sacred ritual led by a priest of the sun, these people made the ultimate sacrifice. All that is left of these earthen mounds. They may conceal the secret of a Mayan legacy. The Indians of Cahokia erected a huge circle of wooden posts to chart the movement of the sun and the moon. It sits 300 miles from the city of Chicago. It is called the American Woodhenge. The ancient astronomers have disappeared, but their calendar survives. How did they gain their knowledge of the universe?
This series presents information based in part on theory and conjecture. The producer's purpose is to suggest some possible explanations, but not necessarily the only ones, to the mysteries we will examine.
Long before the first explorers came to America, an extraordinary civilization arose in southern Illinois. The people had no metal tools, no written language. But their lives were ordered by a profound understanding of nature and the universe. On these mounds once stood the temples of a great metropolis, home to 40,000 men and women. The Indians flourished for 500 years. Then they disappeared. Beneath the mounds, scientists uncovered a fascinating clue to the origins of the lost city of Cahokia. In 1961, Dr. Warren Whitry of the University of Illinois began an excavation on the outskirts of the mounds. In a series of deep pits, he found remnants of wooden posts. At first, he thought they were part of a giant stockade surrounding the city. As more poles were unearthed, Whitry became convinced that a grand design lay behind their arrangement. He began to reconstruct the ancient site, sinking new posts in the original holes. What anthropologists knew about the Indians of Cahokia did not prepare him for what would be revealed. The posts seemed to form a giant circle, like a circle of stone erected 3,000 years before at Stonehenge.
We believe that the American Woodhenge functioned in somewhat the same way as the famous site in England known as Stonehenge. These sites were used by ancient people to observe sunrise at various times of the year, and the observation of sunrise served as a kind of calendar.
Woodhenge was built with a precision that is astonishing even today. It was analyzed on the same computer used for Stonehenge, and the circle at Cahokia proved more accurately aligned to the sun. From Whitry's discovery, anthropologists were able to reconstruct the pattern of Cahokian life. They found that here was a culture different from other tribes of North America. Their society revolved around a calendar that linked men on Earth with the gods who ruled the skies. Before beginning any new enterprise, the people sought the guidance of the sun. Each morning, a priest of the sun went out to greet the dawn. Like the chiefs of other tribes, his power was absolute, for only a priest could communicate with the gods. Inside the mounds was evidence that the sun priest was even more powerful than other chiefs. His death carried great import for the whole of Cahokian society. A team of archaeologists made an astonishing discovery that set Cahokia apart. 53 young women were buried in a mass grave. They had all been strangled. Nearby were the partial remains of 4 young men. It appeared that their heads and hands had been deliberately severed. The key to these mysterious deaths lay in yet another tomb, where a priest had been buried with a hoard of possessions. The lavish burial told of men and women sacrificed to ensure their priest a safe journey to the gods. Nowhere in the story of the ancient Americas was there ever such a massive ritual sacrifice. Were the Cahokians inspired by ideas from another place and time? Deep in the Mexican jungle at Teotihuacan, a remarkable culture whose religion required such sacrifices was flourishing by 500 AD. They were the Mayans. Their society was the most advanced on the entire continent. Their cities reveal a surprising knowledge of architecture and engineering. Their tower observatories map the skies as accurately as the telescopes of today. The Mayans developed the earliest written language and a system of mathematics and geometry that had no equal. While it is difficult to imagine a relationship between their culture and the early Indians of America, thousands of miles to the north, beneath the mounds, there may lie the connection between Cahokia and the ancient cities of Mexico. Dr. Whitry explains.
We have identified a tentative Cahokia yard. a unit of measurement that was used over and over again in even multiples.
The Cahokia yard is nearly identical to the standard measurement used by the Mayans throughout their empire. An intriguing correspondence in time may connect their societies. The turning point in Cahokia's development came around the year 900, precisely as the Mayan civilization was drawing to an end in Mexico. The Mayans have vanished. No one knows where they fled when their cities began to die. Do the similarities in religion and astronomy tell us the Mayans went far to the north? Could they have traveled 5,000 miles to the Indians of Cahokia with their ideas and culture intact? It's incredible to imagine that the ideas of one culture could be transferred across an entire continent in a single century. How can we account for the mysterious parallels that seem to exist? Was there a bridge between the jungle strongholds of the Mayans and the mounds in Illinois? We may find an answer in the southwestern desert that lies between them. 1,000 years ago, a desert tribe called Anasazi erected a city of stone towers unlike anything else seen in this country. The secret of these strange towers in Utah has eluded scientists for many centuries. If they were storehouses, why do they have windows? If they were watchtowers, why are the windows so small? Recently, an astronomer from the Smithsonian Institution has advanced a new theory. Dr. Ray Williamson thinks they were built to observe the heavens.
What's particularly exciting about this room is that there are 3 sun alignments in it. Now, we consider this combination of 3 alignments to be an excellent calendar room. It's an excellent place, even today, where we could, if we stayed here long enough throughout the year, actually put marks on the walls to tell us what day it is, and to very accurately determine the summer solstice, the winter solstice, and the equinox.
Several of the towers have strategic windows that line up with the rising moon. It would have taken many generations of careful study to make them so accurate. Dr. Williamson believes the alignments would provide the basis for predicting eclipses, a complex procedure understood by only a few cultures.
We have indications here that they were going in the direction of developing a calendar as complicated as a Mayan calendar. That's a guess, that's a hypothesis. It's one that we're working on right now. These towers have been mysteries for years. Some people have suggested that these towers are reminiscent of the Mayan towers. I'm not sure.
Mayan observatories took a circular form, an expression in stone of the wind and the cosmos. Did they inspire the tower observatories of the Southwest?
We found recently some small evidence of Mexican influence up in this area. And perhaps that's associated with the towers that are here, I don't know. I think they're still mysteries.
"300 miles from the Anasazi, another ancient people erected a temple to the skies. They too have disappeared, but they left behind an important clue. The observatory at Casa Grande, Arizona, remains as evidence that these Indians sought to understand the universe. Of an entire pueblo, only a few walls have survived the centuries. Despite the protection of its sheltering roof, the observatory may not last for another 50 years.
the Hohokam Indians.
Robert Hicks of the University of Arizona has been investigating Casa Grande.
The alignments are very similar to Mayan astronomical alignments at the Caracol Observatory in Mexico. We find the same alignments here as we do in the Caracol, and we feel that there was an influence from Central America. We feel that a representative of this Mayan elite, somebody with a specialized knowledge about astronomy and also site planning, may have come up to direct the construction of this building.
Most anthropologists do not accept this theory. But recently, scientists have uncovered new evidence that may redefine the extent of the Mayan legacy. In the deserts of the Southwest, this country's prehistoric astronomy reached its greatest heights. If there was a link between the ancient Mayans and the Indians of Cahokia, a continent away, perhaps we will find it here. A pueblo in New Mexico may well be the crossroads in that ancient connection. It is Chaco Canyon, built out of stone and brick by the Anasazi, architects of the mysterious towers in Utah. In a massive ceremonial structure called the Great Kiva, astronomers found evidence of a scientific knowledge that rivals anything we know today. At the summer solstice, Dr. Williamson has come to observe the dawn. Every year on the 21st of June, the sun repeats a timeless pattern.
All right. Now that will just about get the sun coming over. There it comes. We're here in Chaco Canyon in a great kiva, Casa Rinconada, to determine the astronomical alignments of this building that we're in. We're here on the solstice because on the solstice the sun comes through this port that you see and falls on that low niche over there. The solstice was a special time for the Indians who constructed this building. They needed to know when the solstice occurred to set their calendar.
At the winter solstice, a ritual of fire ushered in the new year. In December, the sun seemed to stop in its winter house. The Indians mounted an elaborate display of fire and light to prompt their god, the sun, and set the year in motion. The ceremony of fire can be traced to the ancient cities of Mexico. How did it come to the Anasazi? 1,000 years ago, the dwellings at Chaco were dug into the ground. Then, quite suddenly, an extraordinary change swept the canyon. The Anasazi began to build a city of towering pueblos. Almost overnight, Chaco became an active center of agriculture and trade. Its wealth based on the rich deposits of turquoise that lay nearby. The population grew to 25,000 men and women as the Indians learned to mine the stone. The turquoise attracted merchants from far away. Some believe that Mexican traders came north seeking the sacred stone for the worship of their god Quetzalcoatl.
Turquoise is the godstone for Quetzalcoatl. It was also important to some of the other Mexican
Dr. Jonathan Raymond of Illinois State University.
If Quetzalcoatl is going to be properly served, he's got to have the turquoise that he demands. Mexico had turquoise, but not enough. The Southwest had abundant turquoise, and so the merchants of Quetzalcoatl and the other deity cults came out of North Mexico into the Southwest looking for turquoise.
The merchants were men of high status called Pochteka, employed by the courts of Mexico to supply their temples with turquoise. To Chaco, they brought new crops, more productive corn. Was it simple trade or something more? For here were the peoples of two distant cultures speaking different languages. Did they achieve a deeper communication that reached beyond trade? Was information part of the exchange? At the head of the canyon, the Indians constructed an elaborate road system stretching for 300 miles. Was it built to welcome travelers from the south? Did the merchants also receive more than the sacred stone itself? Raymond believes the Anasazi not only supplied the raw turquoise, but actually worked it into finished products. The beads and ritual mosaics used by the Mexican culture thousands of miles away.
And in time, Chaco and the other areas around it came under the heavy influence of Mexican exploitation, economic exploitation, for the betterment of these religious cults of North Mexico.
In an excavation for the National Science Foundation, Raymond unearthed dramatic evidence to support his claim. He discovered two tombs that were like no others seen in this country. Two skeletons were found, laid out on thousands of turquoise beads. 12 men had been beheaded to accompany them in death. To Raymond, the implications were clear. These were the graves of important visitors from another land.
They're not your ordinary Pueblo peoples. These are someone special. I think Pochteca.
If the Pochteca did bring new crops to the north, they undoubtedly would have taught the Indians how to grow them, passing along the astronomical knowledge necessary for a seasonal calendar. Knowledge not only of the sun and the moon, but of the stars as well. Using the computer, Dr. Raymond has found evidence to substantiate his theory.
What we think the Anasazi watched is based on what we know the historic Pueblos, like the Zuni and the Hopi, watched. We have good historic records for this. We know that they watched Orion. We know that they watched the Pleiades. We know that they watched the Gemini twins. If you take the stars that are used in the Southwest and the stars that are used in Mexico, we find that they are using many of the same stars and many of the same constellations. In fact, not only are they observing the same ones, but they're using them in precisely the same way. When we take that into consideration, and when we calculate the odds against that happening, we come up with something on the order of about 45 million to 1. In other words, the very fact that they're using the same stars, the same constellations, and using them in the same way strongly suggests that there was contact between the two areas.
Did elite members of an ancient empire carry a knowledge of the sun and the stars to the prehistoric Indians of the American desert? Could it also have been brought to a tribe in Illinois? A new discovery of modern science indicates that Mexican trade was even more extensive than had been theorized. In New York, a nuclear chemist has traced the turquoise in ancient artifacts to their points of origin. Dr. Garman Harbottle explains his research.
We're carrying out neutron activation analysis of turquoise from mines in the American Southwest and also from artifacts which are found in Mexico. We have so far succeeded in matching some turquoise artifacts found in West Mexico with a mine outside Santa Fe, New Mexico. In consequence of this, we are beginning to get evidence that there was a turquoise trade between the high civilizations of Mexico and the American Southwest.
Did the traders from Mexico sow the seeds of their knowledge in the Southwest and beyond? Perhaps the mysterious circle at Cahokia can be traced to a legacy of astronomy and religion that the Mayans left behind.
Only a few phrases in English literature have left the printed page to gain their own immortality. Shakespeare's "to be or not to be" is one. Charles Dickens' "it was the best of times, it was the worst of times" is another. None, perhaps, has captured the world's imagination more completely than "Elementary, my dear Watson, elementary." Spoken by the most brilliant and popular private detective of all time. The question is still debated to this day. Who was Sherlock Holmes?
Really, Holmes, there's something positively inhuman about you at times.
My dear Watson, I never allow my judgment to be biased by personal qualities.
While it is common knowledge that Conan Doyle wrote the adventures of Sherlock Holmes, many readers were and still are convinced that this unique detective actually existed. Did he?
This series presents information based in part on theory and conjecture. The producer's purpose is to suggest some possible explanations, but not necessarily the only ones, to the mysteries we will examine.
An expert on the Sherlock Holmes period, Peter Lovesey.
The London of Sherlock Holmes was a sinister place, like these vaults of the Western Dock. It was a place of extreme poverty and squalor, where Jack the Ripper roamed the fog-enshrouded streets of the East End looking for his miserable victims. And the police were quite unable to control the crime. But many people look back on it as a golden age, when Queen Victoria had reigned for as long as anyone could remember, and the upper classes could feel secure, safeguarded by the greatest of all detectives, Mr. Sherlock Holmes of Baker Street.
The fact of the matter was, in the decade prior to Holmes' appearance in print, the London police had failed to combat the growing crime rate. Even corruption in the force flourished. There were dynamitings involving the Irish problem, ruthlessly suppressed meetings of the unemployed, and most of all, the notorious Jack the Ripper murders, never solved. Not all police were inefficient or corrupt, of course, but leadership was clearly lacking. The public was not being served. The birth of Sherlock Holmes as a public figure is documented in a rare collection owned by Stanley Mackenzie.
The big cornerstone of any Sherlock Holmes collection, and which is the envy of most collectors, is Beeton's Christmas Annual for 1887. In this, A Study in Scarlet was first published. This was the first appearance of the first Sherlock Holmes story. Conan Doyle was paid £25 for the copyright, and he never received another penny. Sherlock Holmes's reputation was enhanced by a play about him written by an American actor, William Gillette. This poster shows Gillette himself in the gas chamber scene in the play. Gillette probably played the part of Holmes more times than any other actor.
An 1895 recording preserves his performance.
How the deuce did you know my wife was away? Marvelous, marvelous. Elementary, my dear fellow, elementary.
From theater to motion pictures was also an elementary step for the master sleuth. Fame and fortune would quickly accrue to Doyle as well.
We are getting on, Watson. I'm glad to see you in a more cheerful mood. We've done remarkable.
By 1933, a third version of A Study in Scarlet had been made, with Reginald Owen playing the detective whose personal and professional style set him apart from all others.
The large number represented the page, the second, the small number, the column, and the other figures the message. You'll find it decoded on the table.
Every Holmes adventure is different, but in all of them he plays the violin, of which he was a master.
A client, Watson. Where? The widow standing under the street lamp.
A widow? Would you like to bet on that?
Of course.
Well, I'm not going down the street to ask her.
Ah. Won't be necessary. She's made up her mind.
So you deduce at a distance, eh?
Not in this case. I recognized her features. She's a Mrs. Murphy. Her husband was murdered 3 days ago.
You mean the man that was found dead in a train?
Exactly. Come in.
Mrs. Murphy to see you, sir.
Mr. Holmes, I'm in such a mess. Such a mess. My husband up and died without leaving me as much as a...
Holmes would never refuse a woman in distress, whether she be plain or beautiful. And in some cases, he might reluctantly have to turn her over to the authorities. For under his cool exterior burned a passion for justice to be feared by all villains.
London's most dangerous crook. The king of blackmailers. A gliding, slithy, venomous snake. Once in his power, he'll squeeze and squeeze until he's drained his victims dry. More than once I've had my net around him, but so far he's managed to wriggle his way out. But the time has come, Watson. No shot broke that window.
How did this modern detective come into being? What was Holmes' creator like? Arthur Conan Doyle was born in Edinburgh in 1859. Raised in one of the gracious Georgian homes in the new town, he enrolled at the age of 17 as a student of medicine at the university. Here he learned the methods of diagnosis, which, applied to the analysis of crime, became the basis of Holmes' famous methods of detection. No one questions that the inspiration for his quick-witted hero came from Doyle's tutor, Dr. Joseph Bell, here recreated for In Search Of.
I've always considered Conan Doyle as one of the best students I ever had. He was exceedingly interested in anything concerned with diagnosis, and never tired of trying to discover those little details that one must look for. I remember he was greatly amused one day. A man came in, sat down. "Good morning, Pat," I said, for it was impossible not to see that he was an Irishman. "Good morning, Your Honor," replied the patient. "Well, and did you like your walk across the links today as you came in from the south side of the town?" said I. "Yes," replied Pat. Did Your Honor see me?" Well, even Doyle could not see how I came to know that, absurdly simple as it was. On a showery day, such as it had been, the reddish clay at the bare part of the links adheres to the boot. Some tiny part of it is bound to remain. There's no such clay anywhere else around the town for miles. Well, that and one or two similar instances excited Doyle's interest and set him discovering for himself in the same direction, which, of course, was exactly what I wanted with him and all my other scholars. Recognition of...
How much of Bell was in Holmes, how much of Doyle himself, no one can say for sure. As a young doctor with few patients, Doyle found plenty of time to write. Years later, he told why he felt compelled to create Holmes.
I've had, of course, a scientific training, and I used occasionally to read detective stories. It always annoyed me how in the old-fashioned detective story, the detective always seemed to get at his results either by some sort of lucky chance or a fluke, or else it was quite unexplained how he got there. He got there, but he never gave an explanation.
In a number of films from the 30s, Arthur Wontner is Sherlock Holmes and Ian Fleming is Dr. Watson. Deductive reasoning is on full display.
Yes, you moved your shaving mirror over to the fireplace. Yes, that's right. My wife has a dressing table where we used to have... How do you know?
My dear Watson, you're a man of precise habits and considerable regard for your personal appearance. Yes, I observe that whilst the right-hand side of your face is closely shaved, the further we get to the left, the more careless your shaving appears. Till we come to the angle of the jaw where it is positively slovenly. I deduce, therefore, that you placed your shaving mirror where the light strikes on the right side of the bed. The bed must obviously be across the end of the room, therefore the fireplace is the only place left which could produce that result. Amazing, Holmes. Elementary, my dear Watson. Elementary.
Yes, Mr. Henry is the victim.
I mean that we should see Mr. Holmes do his stuff.
His stuff? It's a modern expression, Watson, signifying to display one's talents.
That's right. I want Mr. Holmes to tell us what Father's been doing for the last 20 years, just by looking at him.
Holmes is always observant, even of friends.
I have great faith in my abilities, Miss Baskerville, but I'm afraid there's very little data. I merely observed that since we last met, your father has taken to billiards, that he's recently played 100 up with Mr. Trevor.
Absolutely correct, Holmes, but how?
Oh, my dear fellow, it's simplicity itself. I observed that both you and Mr. Trevor have traces of blue chalk between the forefinger and thumb of your left hand, which was put there, obviously, to steady the cue.
There. I hope that satisfies you, Diana.
Where were you married, Mrs. Douglas?
In New York.
Ah, in America?
You know nothing of his life.
Holmes is not only observant, he is worldly wise.
Nothing at all.
That mark on his arm, you know what that is?
No?
You never asked him.
Yes, I did once, but he refused to discuss it. So I never asked again.
You've no idea what it is?
None whatsoever. Can't you suggest anything?
Mrs. Douglas, I suggest that you tell me the truth.
Mr. Holmes!
You know perfectly well what that mark is. You couldn't possibly have lived in America without knowing.
All the reckoning with you, Moriarty.
In one of the films, our master detective's arch-enemy, Professor Moriarty, is about to push Dr. Watson down an 80-foot abandoned elevator shaft.
Very good. I will now remove the panel and wish you a swift journey.
Don't move, any of you. Huh? Except you, my dear Watson, who I'm sure will be more comfortable with us. You must excuse me for trespassing on your private property. I've had the lift put in order again.
You clever...
No compliments, please.
I arrest you, Robert Moriarty.
On what charge?
Being concerned in the murder of the stable boy, Edward Hunter. Well, it's the most amazing case we've ever solved, Holmes.
Elementary, my dear Watson. Elementary.
Most criminologists of today will tip their hats in gratitude to the legacy of Holmes and his creator. In fact, a member of the Sherlock Holmes Society is an official of Scotland Yard, Philip Dalton. Mr. Dalton kindly consented to escort us to a very special, exclusive place. Behind a pub on an obscure street near Trafalgar Square, the Society has assembled a stirring tribute to the leading detective of all time.
Well, here it is, the sitting room at 221B Baker Street. Left exactly as it was on the instructions of Mycroft Holmes, Sherlock's brother. Nothing to be touched. Nothing has been. It's all here. With Persian slipper. With some tobacco still in it. The poker that Sherlock Holmes nearly straightened. The violin that he used to play across his knees. There's the gasogene, there's the Tantalus. Patriotic VR picked out in bullet box. And behind me is the bust of Sherlock Holmes that was the target for Colonel Sebastian Moran's air rifle. And you can still see the bullet hole. This room is, of course, a shrine, and it's visited by pilgrims from all over the world. It's especially a shrine for the Sherlock Holmes Society of London. If, in this room, you were to ask me, was Sherlock Holmes fact or fiction? I'd like to echo the reply given by our president, Lord Gorbooth, who, when asked that question, said, yes.
The claim that Sherlock Holmes did exist beyond the imagination of Conan Doyle may seem preposterous to many. But as we shall see, there is evidence to support this belief. The first clues to why Holmes may have been more than simply a fictional character may be found in Doyle's life itself. H.R.F. Keating is one of Doyle's leading biographers.
But he did other things in many other fields. He was the man who introduced the ski to Switzerland. Before that, it had just been a way of getting about over the snow in Norway. He brought it to Switzerland and started the whole great skiing industry. It was like bringing the pumpkin to America. Then, in the 1914 war, he was the man responsible for the introduction of the modern military steel helmet. He carried out experiments himself with a rifle and proved that protection could be given against the modern bullet. At the same time, he insisted that the troops going over from England to France were equipped with inflatable life jackets, and they went to the British Navy as well.
As significant as these accomplishments were, however, and knighthood would be his reward, what is little known is that Doyle was involved in many cases himself. In Search Of recreates one of them. Conan Doyle's secretary, Major Wood, was perhaps the prototype for Dr. Watson. One morning in 1906, he opened a letter which he thought would arouse Doyle's interest. It was from George Idalgi, an Anglo-Indian lawyer who, on weak circumstantial evidence, and possibly because of his ancestry, had been sentenced to 7 years in prison, charged with slashing and maiming horses with a razor. After serving 3 of these 7 years, he was inexplicably released, but without a pardon. Now he wrote to Doyle, asking to clear his name.
Morning, Alfred.
Arthur, there's a letter here I think you ought to see. It's from a Mr. Idalgi, who, it appears, has been the butt of a gross miscarriage of justice.
Idalgi. Wasn't there an article in the Umpire last month?
Yes, there was. He sent it with his letter. It's amongst those.
Ah, yes, I remember. Extraordinary case. I'll have another look at it. As I read, the unmistakable accent of truth forced itself upon my attention, and I realized that I was in the presence of an appalling tragedy, and that I was called upon to do what I could to set it right. I got other papers in the case, went up to Staffordshire, saw the family, and went over the scene of the crime. Between Idalgi's house and the place where the final mutilation was committed lay the full breadth of the London and North Western Railway, an expanse of rails, wires, and other obstacles, with hedges to be forced on either side, so that I, a strong and active man, in broad daylight, found it a hard matter to pass. Not until I had examined every fact thoroughly from every angle did I arrange to question Idalgi. The meeting took place at my hotel. I had been delayed, and he was passing the time by reading the paper. I recognized my man by his dark face, so I stood and observed him. Mr. Idalgi, I presume.
Oh, Sir Arthur.
Do you suffer from astigmatic myopia?
This is indeed an honor.
Look, don't you wear glasses?
Never have, Sir Arthur. They can't fit me glasses that are any use. I have been to 2 ophthalmic surgeons, and both...
The idea of such a man scouring the fields at night and assaulting animals while avoiding the watchful police was ludicrous to anyone who can imagine what the world looks like to eyes with myopia of 8 diopters. So bad was his defense in his trial that no mention, as far as I could ascertain, was ever made of the fact that the man was practically blind.
Finally, Doyle wrote a series of articles in the Daily Telegraph. They provoked a public outcry, and Doyle was invited to a meeting with the Home Secretary. Not satisfied with simply clearing Idalgi's name, Doyle now set out to discover the identity of the real slasher. Before long, he began receiving threatening letters with a seaport postmark, providing him with the clues he needed. Clearly, the letters were written by a disturbed, perhaps pathological man who also despised foreigners. Doyle then traced Idalgi's history from the time of the crimes backwards, all the way to Idalgi's grammar school. Had there been a fellow student with a vicious nature, a hatred against foreigners, and a grudge against Idalgi himself, and who subsequently went to sea, there had. Doyle discovered his present whereabouts and learned he had quit the sea at the time the slashings began. He had been trained in a slaughterhouse, and he showed signs of periodic insanity. Doyle even got hold of a long horse lancet with which the slashings had undoubtedly been committed. The Law Society readmitted Idalgi to the role of solicitors. Although the Home Office granted Idalgi his pardon, they wouldn't agree to any compensation. However, the case in due course paved the way for establishing a court of criminal appeal. And this was only one of the good many real-life cases in which Doyle achieved success. Sherlock Holmes and his creator were inseparably linked. In his autobiography, Doyle admitted,
"A man cannot spin a character out of his own inner consciousness and make it really lifelike unless he has some of that character within him."
The horse-drawn carriages of 1895 may have disappeared, but the living presence of Sherlock Holmes of Baker Street persists to this day. Nearly 100 years after A Study in Scarlet, letters still come into that address at 221B Baker Street, now the offices of an insurance company who reply on Sherlock Holmes' behalf.
And this one's from San Diego, California. It's addressed to Mr. Sherlock Holmes or Dr. John Watson, MD.
For those who believe Sherlock Holmes was only a figment of a writer's imagination, In Search of humbly submits its deduction that he did, in a very real way, exist. In the year 986, a Viking ship penetrated Arctic ice, guarding the coast of an unknown land. The frigid waters teemed with life. A Viking colony was established at the very edge of the known world, in a country the settlers named Greenland. 3.5 centuries later, a ship from Europe put into the settlement. The sailors found the colony empty, abandoned, desolate. Why had the Viking settlers vanished? Eskimo legends describe a North American tribe of giants and dwarves. Is there a link between these Eskimo legends and the mysterious end of the Viking colony on Greenland?
This series presents information based in part on theory and conjecture. The producer's purpose is to suggest some possible explanations, but not necessarily the only ones, to the mysteries we will examine.
A bronze warrior marks the saga's beginning.
1,000 years ago, Eric the Red led a fleet of Viking ships from this Icelandic harbor west into the unknown sea. It is a story that ends in mystery. History's tides have swept past man's fainter tracks, leaving only scattered patterns that seem to lead nowhere. Time has almost obliterated the adventures of one particular man. Eric the Red was an old-style Viking, earthy, wild, fiercely independent. 10 centuries ago in Norway, Eric killed some king's men in a bloody fight. He fled to Iceland. He found the land already settled. Then, as now, its people were sheep farmers and fishermen. They had recently become Christians, and with the zeal of converts, built churches over the holy sites of their pagan days. The cults of the Old Norse faith were savagely suppressed, but Eric the Red continued to worship the Norse god Thor. July 1978. A small crowd gathers at a solitary farm in a rural district of western Iceland. They have come to witness secret rites banned since the days of Eric the Red. Svenbjorn Beintansson has revived the old pagan faith. His followers call him All-Share-Yargodi, High Priest.
We have old gods in our religion. Our Vikings, the old Vikings, if they was going to sail somewhere, they asked the spirit, the sea god, and the battle god, the fight god, you know. Okay. And then we celebrate and we drink for your healthy.
This is a Thor's hammer.
Thor's hammer symbolized the Old Norse faith. It represented a thunderbolt, a mystic sign venerated in Northern Europe since prehistoric times. Svenbjorn Beintansson leads his followers into a mountain sanctuary far from the roads and towns of modern Iceland. The Vikings worshipped the primal forces of nature. Chief deity was the sky god, ruler of storms, wielder of thunderbolts. After 10 centuries of suppression, a horn of mead is once again offered to mighty Thor. On the plain near Thingvellir Falls, the past is celebrated. Modern Icelandic farmers assemble as their ancestors did in the summer of 982. Horses are judged today. 1,000 summers ago, they judged men. Norse freemen gathered here to politic, to settle disputes. Times were changing. Life was becoming more orderly, civilized. That spring, Eric's axe had swung in another bloody brawl. Eric the Red was outlawed. Eric fled. He sailed west into the unknown. From northern mists loomed a massive island, icebound, uninhabitable but for a narrow strip of land on its southwest coast. Here, Eric's people settled, optimistically calling their new home Greenland. They homesteaded, building houses and barns, enclosing pastures and fields. But even in Greenland, Eric the Red did not find complete refuge. Eric's wife raised Greenland's first church. She barred Eric from their home until he agreed to give up pagan ways.
but evidence suggests the old Vikings' conversion was not complete. Greenland's fjords could not sustain the colony. Crops would not grow. The land's wealth was to be reaped only in its wilderness. Small groups of Norse hunters fanned out through a vast expanse. Arctic seas soon wrecked their long ships, but they pressed on in small open boats on voyages that must have lasted years. Rarely were European ships able to journey to distant Greenland. Years elapsed between visits, but a few Arctic treasures lured traders to venture west. One of those treasures was the gyrfalcon. Sultans and caliphs offered coffers of gold for a live Greenland falcon. Arab court geographers told them this fierce and most valuable hunting bird came from world's end, from the fabled Ultima Thule, the land farthest north. Norse hunters pushed beyond the edge of the known world. Narwhal, the great horned whale of the high Arctic. In distant Europe, medieval alchemists sold the whale tusk as unicorn's horn, ground into magical potions. A single narwhal could make a hunter rich for life if he survived the vast, uncharted wilderness and succeeded in making his way back to Greenland. Few returned. Fewer ships arrived from Europe. The Norse Greenlanders sank into ever deeper isolation and were lost to history, except for a single brief reference. In 1300, church annals noted that a Greenlander had been burned at the stake for secretly practicing the old faith. After that, there is only silence. In the summer of 1342, a ship put into the western settlement. It carried a bishop sent from Europe to investigate why the Greenlanders had fallen behind in their church tithes. The Norse farms were empty, abandoned. There was nothing else, no messages, no signs of life. The settlers had simply vanished. For the last 600 years, the fate of the Norse Greenlanders has remained one of history's most baffling puzzles. In 1921, archaeologists dug near Cape Farewell at Greenland's southern tip. They found a church graveyard and the huddled remains of hunchbacks, dwarves, sterile cripples. Was the mystery solved? Had the Norse colony died out from inbreeding and malnutrition, from severest cultural isolation? At the cemetery's edge, pointing west toward America, was a coffin, nearly 7 feet long and empty. The withered end of Eric's people, or only the poor and weak left behind? The search for the lost Vikings of Greenland leads us to the northern coasts of Canada. Here, even in summer, Arctic seas rage. Travelers peer anxiously into the distance, looking for the signs of safe harbor that mean Payne Bay. Payne Bay, swept by fierce tides, frigid, remote, yet teeming with life. The richest caribou lands in Canada's eastern Arctic. Bear, trout, char, seal, and whale. High above Payne Bay, visible at sea for many miles, stand 3 beacons. It is believed they predate Columbus' first voyage to North America by centuries. A 500-pound rock crowns 15 feet of carefully laid stone courses. Yet the primitive Eskimo who roamed here when these sea beacons were built were 4 feet tall and lived in holes roofed with whale ribs and animal skins. Professor Thomas E. Lee of Quebec's Université Laval has spent 12 years seeking the builders of Payne Bay's curious ruins. Lee has developed a theory not accepted by some experts. The modern Canadian Eskimo community of Payne Bay has proved a rich source of information and has led Lee to develop his unique theory.
Hello, Thomas Lee.
Modern technology has overwhelmed the ancient lifestyle of the Inuit community. Where once the young learned the ways of the Eskimo from their fathers, now state-run schools provide education, and gradually the old ways are becoming dim memories. Vaguely remembered are the legends of dwarves and giants that roam the land. The tunic. Legends that reach deeply into the Inuit past.
This is my grandmother, Minnie Anahatak. I'm her grandchild, Lali Anahatak.
Mrs. Minnie Anahatak was born 79 years ago in the igloo of an Inuit winter hunting camp. Professor Lee records tribal memories he believes date back nearly 800 years.
His parents, Anahatak got this story from his parents, and they got this story from the Inuit who lived in Sasquatch. That's why they got this story.
And they could lift big stones.
Yes, they've heard that they were fairly strong.
What kind of people were they?
There were 2 kinds, big and small one. Even though small one, they were still strong. So there was almost a giant tunics and also the small tunics. Know why they were scared of Halunaks, because it was the first time they met Halunaks with white skin and bushy beard. They were different than Inuit.
They had beards.
Or maybe they had bushy eyebrows, etc.
I first saw Pamiak Island in 1966. I had 2 Eskimo or Inuit with me, one of whom was an old man by the name of Zachariasi.
Professor Lee has made a series of spectacular discoveries in this seldom visited region of Arctic Canada. He believes that he has identified the legendary tunic. Near the Payne River's mouth lies Pamiak Island.
When I first saw it was in a wild and beautiful setting, in sort of an amphitheater. It was extremely impressive because of its great size and setting. Well, Zachariasi took me across the island and then left me and pointed in the direction in which I should go. And he said it was built. Well, he would express it by saying, before, 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 before.
The central buildings in ancient communities were the longhouses, communal sleeping quarters. The Pamiak Island longhouses provide Dr. Lee with a basis for his theory.
This enormous longhouse was 83 feet long and 20 feet wide inside dimensions. It was rather ship-shaped with the walls out-curving a little bit. And this is the north room, the sleeping quarters. The stones in the walls were very heavy. This particular stone weighs over 1,000 pounds. And here we enter the great hall with 11 fireplaces down the center. And since there were 11 food storage pits on the outside of the building, I think it is very obvious that there were 11 families. And If we suppose that there were 5 people in each family, then we have approximately 50 or 55 people living in this longhouse. And that, of course, means social organization far beyond the scope of the Eskimo. People who lived in this house were, in my opinion, Norsemen. I think that they were hunters from Greenland, came here just the men alone, and probably they married native women and had half-breed children. This was a very rich hunting place. It still is.
Professor Lee believes that a handful of Viking hunters cut themselves adrift from the dying Greenland colony and settled here in North America, eventually fathering a tribe of mixed bloods. Lee's theories have been hotly attacked. His opponents claim the longhouse was built by Eskimo. Yet the nearest forests that could have supplied beams for its caribou skin roof lie 150 miles to the south. They could only have been brought by ships, which the Eskimo never had. The Eskimo were well adapted to this environment. Never would they have built such a drafty, cold structure. Lee believes it served as a primitive palace.
That longhouse was a part of a complex which extends up the coast all the way to Diana Bay, about 70 miles farther north. You find these longhouses at intervals along that distance. And I have thought about this as being a sort of a kingdom.
An Arctic kingdom whose leaders were Norse and whose followers were Stone Age Eskimo. The remains of their crude tent rings still crowd around the longhouse. The Eskimo had much to learn from Iron Age Europeans. Excavating carefully, Professor Lee found the weathered blade of a Norse battle axe.
If we put out from this small bay and sail on a course that is due east, with a favorable wind, in 1 week's time we will come directly into Eriksfjord on the southwest coast of Greenland.
Did a remnant of Eric's people at long last find refuge here in this Arctic fastness? Set on a ridge not 50 yards from the great longhouse, these stone tombs crown Professor Lee's sensational findings. In them, he discovered what he believes are the remains of a primitive Eskimo, a mixed blood, and that of a medieval white male, the first and only pre-Columbian European skull ever found in the Western Hemisphere. Lee's discoveries have stirred fierce controversy. Textbooks are not easily rewritten. Old theories tell us that past cultures lived and died in strict isolation, but new ideas suggest that mankind's evolutionary steps may have been closely linked. In death, the Norse Greenlanders gave birth to a new kind of Eskimo, bigger, stronger, more skillful, whose descendants still hold the land farthest north. A day's journey upstream from the Paine River's mouth, modern Inuit pitch a hunting camp.
Yeah, I saw a lot of tracks. This is the only one we saw.
Centuries pass, but Arctic life does not change.
22 Magnum.
Hunters still travel the river in search of caribou.
I think that we have just begun to get at the answers to the Norse presence in Ungava. We've just scratched the surface. We have not finished with the Paine Lake evidence by any means. We need at least one more expedition in there. And along the coast of Ungava, out this way, we have reports of longhouses that we have not been able to see. I think there may be a great deal of evidence remaining. In fact, I suspect that we will find more things in the interior someday when we do some thorough searching.
On the heights above the camp stands a beacon that points deep into the North American interior.
People say that this was made by the Inuit or the Eskimo. But as you can plainly see, this is a Thor's hammer.
On the 17th of July, 1978, there appeared along the timberline of Mount Hood, Oregon, 3 creatures never before filmed. They are the monsters of the Northwest. The Indians call them Sasquatch, the white man, Bigfoot. These primal-looking figures are human beings dressed in costumes for a motion picture. In every detail, they are duplicates of the part man, part ape, described by a variety of reliable eyewitnesses. Arch Buckley has no doubt about the existence of the monster known as Bigfoot. On the night of June 17th, 1970, after 40 years of searching, Arch was soon to be rewarded by a sight he will never forget.
This series presents information based in part on theory and conjecture. The producer's purpose is to suggest some possible explanations, but not necessarily the only ones, to the mysteries we will examine.
Loch Ness, the lovely 24-mile-long lake in Scotland, has sustained an incredible legend for some 16 centuries. That living somewhere beneath its placid surface is a giant prehistoric monster. In the past, In Search Of made its own investigation of the fascinating mystery and presented the most authenticated picture of the creature taken up to that time.
Interesting is what's come out of it.
Two well-known investigators bring us up to date. Peter Byrne, whose specialty is Bigfoot and the abominable snowman, interviewed Tim Dimsdale, considered a leading expert on the Loch Ness monster.
And incidentally, what is new? What's been discovered in this last 6 months or so?
Well, there's been some very exciting new developments. Last summer, surface photography, there was some 2 color stills in 35, shot at about 100 yards of a head and neck out of the water. And this is very exciting stuff.
It really is, yes. What do you really think these creatures at Loch Ness are?
I think the most exciting, dramatic, and probably the most likely theory, in my humble view, is that it is a survival, an evolved species of plesiosaur. These were the marine saurians that used to live at sea in the Cretaceous period 70 million years ago, which means they've had a long time to adapt and get bigger. They've got bigger. If this is a plesiosaur, it's got much bigger. And of course, if that's the case, it's enormously exciting. It's very exciting anyway.
How could they have existed all this time and survived in a place like Loch Ness?
Well, we have the classic case. How could they have survived? The classic case of the coelacanth, archaic species of fish, which was supposed to have conked out at the same time, incidentally, in the Cretaceous. And they found them off Madagascar. It didn't. Crocodiles are saurians. They haven't changed at all. It's not impossible that this thing has continued to survive in the sea, and that Loch Ness used to be connected to the sea quite recently. Land rose, it got cut off. So it's not impossible. It's unlikely, but it's not impossible. The fact of the matter is that these animals are real. Whatever they are, they exist. Like your Bigfoot.
Thousands of miles away, along the foggy northern California coast, a unique group of men carry on the search for Bigfoot. They are not hunters in the usual sense. They wield no guns. They spend months each year tracing every available clue, hoping to make contact with the creature they know exists and is endangered by man.
Most scientists are, by nature, cautious. Quite properly, they don't announce discoveries until they have substantial proof to support their claims. Certainly, they tend to avoid areas of research that might expose them to ridicule by their colleagues. One such area is, of course, the controversial figure of long-standing legend, the elusive Bigfoot. Therefore, the field of investigation has been taken over by a number of amateurs who have no professional status to jeopardize. We shall follow one group of these monster hunters as they seek further proof to back their belief that Bigfoot does, in fact, exist.
Calling themselves the Bay Area Group, they focus their intensive pursuit of Bigfoot mainly in the forests and mountains north of San Francisco. Led by Arch Buckley, they've narrowed their searching to particular areas where prior evidences of the creature have been uncovered. The personnel of each trip may vary, but the information gathered is available to all members. Al Berry is a journalist from Sacramento, specializing in tape recording the sounds of Bigfoot. Warren Thompson of the San Mateo school system seeks proof by photography. Spotting lairs where Bigfoot may have slept is of major interest to Steve Sanders, zoologist and veterinarian. Arch is a footprint expert, but for him, the method of communication is all important.
I saw a Bigfoot. I've had one sighting, but I've had numerous incidents where I've been able to develop somewhat of a rapport with them. Well, there's a great deal more love in this world than it's ever expressed. And animals are no different than people. And if you think positively and act positively, and through the media of soft voice, it's amazing how you can develop a rapport with wild animals. And I'm not talking about park animals. I'm talking about wild animals. And Bigfoot is no different.
The group believes they are dealing with a nocturnal, nomadic creature who keeps constantly on the move. One of the reasons it's been so hard to capture it on film.
I don't think so. Yeah, their beds and seats are more...
More often than not, there are false clues and disappointments. When not camping out, the group headquarters in remote lodges. As expected, Bigfoot dominates their conversations.
We feel in the Bay Area group that we're dealing with a species that's already an endangered species. And under no circumstances do we recommend going out and shooting one.
One may rightly ask what inspires the group's belief and commitment.
What first convinced me that these creatures exist was an incident that I had in 1969, camping about 20 miles north of the confluence of the Klamath and Trinity Rivers in Northern California, when one of these creatures, about 4 in the morning, walked by the side of the tent into the campground, and we were awakened. A commotion from the inside of the tent startled the creature, and it ran off into the brush. And when it became light enough to go out and see, the trail of prints that it had left, 16-inch prints, very human in appearance, with a stride of 56 to 60 inches between them, is what made a believer out of me.
Footprints, bits of hair that defy classification, all intriguing evidence that an unusual creature inhabits the woods have been found at one time or another. Also, a unique sound has been heard.
It was a remote, high mountain area, and I was aware that there had been some strange goings-on in this area from accounts of other people who had been there. And it was a long hike in, and I got in there in the late afternoon. I set my tape recorder up. I put my mic, taped it to a tree a little ways away from where I'd be bedding down, and then proceeded to wait along and see what developed.
Al Berry recreates for us what happened on the night of October 21st, 1972.
later on that evening, after it grew dark, well, I was tired from the hike in, and I had begun to doze off, when all of a sudden I was awakened by some strange sounds. It was very startling. I didn't know what to think. I had very mixed emotions. On one hand, I was wondering, well, could somebody possibly be out there doing it, some human being? And on the other hand, viscerally, my knees were shaking and my insides were turning a bit, and I was wondering if maybe what I was hearing was some creature that was stranger than anything that we knew. We've had the sounds analyzed since then, and at the University of Wyoming by a professor of electrical engineering there. And the results are the sounds could not have been made by man or any known animal.
Professor Curlin of the University of Wyoming confirmed to In Search Of that Al's tape was tested and shown not to have been artificially manufactured.
As you know, for centuries, we've had reports of large, man-like creatures coming from the Pacific Northwest. Reports from reputable individuals from all walks of life. And in investigating these, I've been struck by the consistency of the reports, the physical appearance, the behavior patterns, and by the sincerity of the people that I've talked to. All these people can't be lying.
The Oregon Regional Primate Center in Portland seemed the logical place to inquire into the possibility of Bigfoot's existence and of his being a distant relative of man. Is it conceivable that a form of man-ape has persisted in the wilds of the Northwest for eons? And if it does exist, how could it elude capture by scientists or killing by hunters? The questions were put to the center's director, the distinguished zoologist, biologist, and primatologist, Dr. William Montagna.
The elements that would make me believe the existence of such creatures would be, for example, artifacts. Human beings, singularly, are deprived of weapons, but they have the best weapons of them all. They have a pair of hands with which they make weapons, and these hands are intimately attached to the central nervous system, and therefore they don't need natural weapons. And we have found absolutely nothing that has been presented, at least, as evidence that these creatures are in existence. If they were humanoid, they would have certainly used their hands to make weapons.
Most scientists want to play it safe. They want to be sure that they're delving with something that they can actually draw a finding and a conclusion.
I am not a specialist in hallucinations. I am sure that people who claim to have seen have in fact seen it. But I'm sure that people claim to have seen God. And I'm sure they have seen it, but they cannot prove to me that they have.
Now, we feel that we have enough information in relation just to our footprints and some of the information that we have gathered. We know positively in our own mind that we're dealing with a humanoid primate.
From what alleged evidence has been presented to me, I have to admit that it is a hoax indeed.
Nevertheless, in June of 1978, the University of British Columbia held an international conference on the subject of Bigfoot's existence. For the first time, a major academic institution had taken notice of, let alone dignified, this controversial subject.
And in the process leaves the medicine songs and divining crystal. Perhaps something of the same pattern can be discerned for Sasquatch. According to Wayne Suttles' presentation last night, the image of Sasquatch has changed over the years.
Bigfoot Sasquatch Information Service Incorporated has the largest files on Bigfoot Sasquatch research in the world.
I really think there's a metastructure to it. You know, the papers are arranged in a lot.
The conference ended with no official conclusion as to Bigfoot's existence or non-existence.
Particularly when there's been a sighting.
As laymen mingled with professional investigators, however, Bigfoot believers were encouraged by a sense that a new degree of credibility had been brought to a subject heretofore considered only a myth. The scientific community is still, to say the least, skeptical.
We're going to be making a presentation on Saturday, and hopefully, we'll get the sounds out in front of people where they can hear them as they're pretty much as they're recorded.
I've read the summary, and it's very interesting. Yes, it looks as though it might be onto something. It really does.
For the Indians of the Pacific Northwest, there's never been any doubt that Bigfoot or Sasquatch shared the woods with them. Numerous totems reflect their impressions of the creature over the centuries. Despite Indian lore and much inexplicable evidence, Bigfoot has yet to be proven a fact of nature. But after 40 years of tireless searching, Arch Buckley claims to have had the definitive experience that erased any possible doubt for him.
But in our particular technique, we knew that this particular group of big feet were in a specific area. And for several weeks, we were attempting to develop a rapport with them. I think we were successful because one day I was able to bring Bigfoot down from the wilderness area to where I had established my base camp on the fringe of the wilderness area.
Arch reenacted For In Search Of what happened starting on a late afternoon in June 1970.
At this particular time, I was using the technique of setting up bait, using principally fish in the form of salmon and shad. Several times during the course of developing this rapport, Bigfoot had come into my campsite and taken my bait. I had a salmon about 12 feet high hanging off of a limb. I had several shad on a tripod about 10 feet away. And I also had set in my car a camera, 35mm camera. During the course of the night, it was sort of a cat and mouse game. I tried to induce him to come into my campsite.
Ook, old friend. Old buck friend, Ook.
I used the word ook. It's a word that I picked up a number of years ago.
Just for you, Ook. Come on, old friend. Fish. Fish.
I knew that he was close by. He was no more than maybe about 30 yards away from me.
Ook, old friend. Old buck friend, Ook. 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 Ook, old friend. Old buck friend, Ook.
I realized that I couldn't induce him to come in. So I thought, well, maybe I'll get in my car. Maybe this would have a change of effect on him. I was hoping that he would take the bait and maybe I could get a shot of him with my 35mm camera. He swung around and I caught him. I caught him from about the waist on up. I was so impressed with the luminous glare of his eyes. He was looking right at me. He was very powerfully built. I turned around and I put the flashlight back to where he was located, and he had disappeared.
Although Arch did not get his picture, for a few magic moments he had confirmed for himself that his years of waiting had not been in vain. That Bigfoot does exist. And despite the disbelief of the scientific community, needs dedicated men like himself and the Bay Area group to carry on the cause. Coming face to face with Bigfoot after decades of diligent searching was obviously a precious highlight in Arch Buckley's life. But he insists that as important to him is the hope that when and if Bigfoot is proven to all to exist, legislation will be passed to declare and protect it as an endangered species. Undoubtedly, his hope can't be realized until science takes a more serious look at this persistent phenomenon. In the meantime, Arch and the Bay Area group are passing on their considerable store of information to interested young students, with the expectation they will enter the scientific world with an open mind on the subject. Students like Donald Rue.
I understand you're enrolling at the University of California.
Well, I'm planning to study behavioral and evolutionary anthropology. Because, like you said, I'd like to understand the behavior of their existence, how they act, you know. Where do they go during the day and what do they do? And with this kind of background, I'd be able to understand the behavior patterns that I observe in the field. And then also with the evolutionary aspect, I'd like to find out where they fit in man's evolution. Are they on a parallel branch, or are they directly our ancestors? I doubt that, but it's possible. And how do they fit in? I'm curious.
Well, this is what George and I had in mind when we organized our Bay Area group. And it's going to be...
It appears that the Bay Area group's wish to preserve both belief in and compassion for Bigfoot will be fulfilled.